anything leading up to that moment where there was a lot of uncertainty and how that diagnosis came to be?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And for me, that was a breakthrough because, again, that whole season, extremely dark. In fact, one of the things I remember, I was really at my lowest. I was at my lowest before the resident, raised that. I was literally feeling like I was at the end of my rope.
Obviously, when you throw a wrench in as a rare disorder, you really don't know what's going to happen. And obviously, you mentioned, I mean, you were on your deathbed, and it's just like
hmm
that messes things up a lot in a family dynamic. And I wanted to ask you just how has that impacted yours specifically?
I often tell people we're not human doings, we're human beings. And so we need to get
Mhm.
better at being, right? And just being present. And so that's one thing I've really tried to do more of with my family.
If you had to give advice, just if somebody was your 2017 self right now,
hmm
what would you tell them?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. I would say,
Welcome to Rarely Discussed, an American Porphyria Foundation podcast with your hosts, Andrew McManaman
and Nicole Castellano.
We have porphyria, a rare disease. Rare diseases differ greatly but share many similarities in how they affect our lives.
Being rare can feel lonely and isolating, but we're stronger together. Join us in meaningful interviews with porphyria and rare disease experts and the patients and families impacted as we connect, learn, and heal together.
We'll talk diagnosis, treatment, pain, mental health, managing daily life, and everything rare. Today's guest is Vonda Ulfig, a woman whose story is a powerful reminder of resilience, persistence, and purpose in the face of uncertainty. In 2017, Vonda spent nearly 2 months in and out of the hospital battling what doctors initially couldn't explain, a true medical mystery. It wasn't until a local resident asked a simple but life-changing question: have you tested her for AIP? Then everything shifted, leading her to the diagnosis of acute intermittent porphyria and ultimately saving her life through the treatment with Panhematin. Since then, Vonda has continued to push forward, earning her doctorate in business administration in 2019 and building a life centered around both professional success and family. A wife, mother, and advocate for balance, she continues to navigate life with AIP while striving for fulfillment in every area of her life, and even took her story to the national stage as a contestant on the Wheel of Fortune, which we will get into. Vonda, welcome to the Rarely Discussed podcast.
thank you so much for having me. It's such a joy. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And there's just a billion things to unpack about your story and everything. But I know probably the first thing that jumps out to people is what in the Wheel of Fortune is going on here. So, how did this kind of progress into you jumping on there and then you ultimately being like, I'm going to mention porphyria on here?
Yeah, so several years ago, I applied to be on Wheel. I've watched Wheel since I was a little girl, and one day I said, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. I'm not gonna let fear get in the way. And so I applied, and I was invited back to a couple of Zoom auditions, and it was actually last fall. I got a text message out of the blue from a producer, and at first I thought it was spam, but I
Yeah.
verified that it was legitimate. And literally 3 weeks later, I was on a flight to LA, and I just have to say the experience was truly the experience of a lifetime. I was just floored with the hospitality of the staff, and had a chance to go through a boot camp just to practice even spinning the wheel and projecting the letters and all of that. And we had a
Yeah.
chance to really think through what did we want to share, right? For those, maybe 30, 45 seconds when we're going to be talking with Ryan Seacrest. And I told myself, you know what? I have to tell my story. I have to share my story. And initially, I was going to mention just a rare genetic blood disease, but I said, you know what? I need to say the name AIP because there are so many people who are going through this, who've gone through this, and it's such a rare disease. We have to make sure that we're raising awareness about this. And if I have even a couple seconds to do that, I said, I want to capitalize on that moment and seize the opportunity to do it. And so I'm just grateful that I had the opportunity to do that and to get the name out.
Yeah, it was such a cool thing. And I know we were talking a little bit off camera when you said porphyria. I was like, and I saw Ryan Seacrest's face. I was like, yeah, he doesn't know what that is, but it's such a cool such a cool way to be able to share and just use that platform to spread the message. But I wanted to kind of take a step back and rewind
Yeah.
back to 2017 when in those 2 months when you were in and out of the hospital, what kind of prompted that? What led to it, and how was that experience for you?
Yeah, so oh my goodness, 2017, I for a while I had a love-hate relationship with 2017.
Yeah, that's
Um
fair.
yes, those 2 months, it really started, long story short, I was actually in West Virginia, facilitating some culture trainings for my company at the time. And when I was on the road for a few days, I started developing just very intense abdominal cramping. And I said, "Oh, this is kind of odd." I said, "When I get home, I'll take
Mhm,
some medication. It'll be fine." But it continued to intensify. And so when I finally got home, it really culminated into me literally, Andrew, the worst pain I could experience. It was worse than labor. And it was April 8th, 2017. That's a date that's forever etched in my memory. But it was 2, 3 in the morning. I woke up with this horrible pain. And so my husband was gracious enough to take me to the ER, and they did, CT scans and MRIs, and all the tests came back negative. And so they sent me on my merry way with pain medication, but the pain
mhm,
medication didn't do jack for me. And so I ended up going back to the ER, and I feel like the cycle repeated itself. I was sent home again with more pain medication. I did that a third time. And it got to the point where they said, "We can't help you here. You're going to have to go somewhere else." So I actually ended up going to another hospital system. And I'm going to tell you, it was like deja vu. It was more CT scans, more MRIs, more negative tests, more pain medication. At one point, they said I had an ovarian cyst, and I knew in my heart of hearts that wasn't correct, but they were insisting on that. And ended up
mhm,
going to another hospital. The vicious cycle continued. More tests that came back negative, more pain medication. And so, all told, in those 2 months, I ended up going to three different hospital systems, literally at least eight different ER visits. And the whole while, doctors could not figure out what the cause of my pain was. And I'm going to tell you, it is the worst pain. I mean, I can't even fully articulate how horrible it was. It was just constant. And the only thing that would give me
mhm.
relief was Dilaudid and morphine. I mean, think about that, morphine, through an IV. And it wasn't just abdominal pain, but I had a lot of pain in my knee joints. They were aching like the plague. I remember lying down on my back one day and looking up at the ceiling and just saying, "Lord, I feel like I'm a prisoner, a prisoner in my own body." And there's nothing worse than having this pain, that you can't escape from. I lost 25 pounds, could not keep food down, skin and bones. And so the whole ordeal was just, it really was the darkest season of my life. I was in a very dire situation. And my husband and I started looking at my life insurance and my bill because doctors just didn't think I was going to make it. It was very, very scary.
Yeah, it's just and what's interesting is it sounds very right in line with how my story played out too. And
Hmm.
it's very interesting because for the people that are listening, watching that maybe didn't catch it in the introduction is we were talking about a resident that said, "Did you test for AIP?" And for me, my diagnosis came from a physician's assistant that was like, "Could be
Hmm.
porphyria." So it was a
Yeah.
very similar thing, very similar experience where morphine was really the only way. And then I was sent home packing because it's
Hmm.
food related illness, it's in your head, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yes.
I wanted to kind of take me back to that time when that resident was like, "Hey, have you tested for AIP?" I mean, can you I know you remember that time pretty vividly, but what did that look like, and was there anything leading up to that moment where there was a lot of uncertainty and how that diagnosis came to be?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And for me, that was a breakthrough because, again, that whole season, extremely dark. In fact, one of the things I remember, I was really at my lowest. I was at my lowest before the resident, raised that. I was literally feeling like I was at the end of my rope. And I remember, in particular, just to kind of take you back a little bit to a very low point of that journey. I remember one time being in the ER, and I was in my wheelchair, and I was just rocking back and forth, and I was writhing in pain. And you're hearing, some of the staff, maybe laughing or joking or talking about plans for the weekend, and they're almost forgetting that there's somebody in front of them who's in pain and fighting for their life. And I had never felt more invisible. That was excruciating, just not just physically, but just emotionally, and mentally.
Mhm.
I remember, again, one of the big things that was happening right before, the breakthrough from the resident. I remember being in my bathtub at home, because the only thing that provided me with any kind of distraction at home was taking a hot bath. And my husband was next to me, and he was holding a bowl of oatmeal and holding a spoon, and he was literally trying to spoon feed me, because I had gotten down to almost 100 pounds. I was so feeble. I was so weak. And I remember, again, during that season, toward the end, right before the resident, spoke up, I was literally praying to die. I remember being either in the hospital bed or my bed at night, and I hated the nighttime. I mean, that is when the pain screamed the loudest, because it was just me alone with my pain. And I remember just praying, it's like, God, I'm just ready to go home. I'm sick of being a prisoner in my own body. I'm ready to go home. So toward the end of that journey, it just, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, like you said, so many times people will start questioning your sanity, right? And questioning your integrity. They start thinking you're there for the pain medication. And I started questioning my own sanity. I'm like, am I making all of this up? Am I a big baby? Because I know my pain is legitimate, but all these tests are coming back negative. What is wrong with me? So right before I experienced that breakthrough, I was lowest of the low, darkest point of my season. And I'm just really grateful that that breakthrough happened. And so, yeah, it was a resident who basically said, "Have you guys tested her for AIP?" And my husband actually had to fill in the blanks and tell me all of this, because in the moment I was really out of it. I was just fighting to get through the next second, the next millisecond. I was trying to survive. So
Mhm.
he said it was a resident who said, "Have you guys ever tested her for AIP?" And I'm just grateful that the resident was courageous enough to speak up. I'm grateful that the doctors were humble enough to listen, and they ended up listening and testing me. And the test came back positive. And I am telling you, oh my goodness, I wanted to do backflips. Of course, by then I was almost 100 pounds. I was very feeble, so I couldn't do backflips, but internally I was doing backflips. And I remember saying, "Yes, I've got a blood disease." I was so, so excited. And most people don't get excited about that, but I was so thrilled. And I'm sure you can relate. I was so thrilled just to finally have an answer and finally have a diagnosis and finally have a path forward and be able to get on the road to recovery. And I feel like the best word to describe it is just relief. After
Mm.
2 months of fighting for my life, fighting to be heard, fighting to be believed, and doctors and nurses just fighting for an answer. Gosh, it was so exhausting. And so I finally felt like I was able to just breathe and exhale. And that relief was everything. And I just want to emphasize, I'm a 1,000%, 1,000,000% confident that this happened because of the power of prayer. And I'm a person of faith. So prayers in Jesus Christ, it really made a difference for me. My parents live in South Carolina and would spend so much time on the road coming to visit me and pray over me. And, my husband would pray and fast, and family members, friends, neighbors, siblings, my church, I go to New Life Church in Gahanna, Ohio, and they showed up in droves, not just to meet my physical needs, whether it's, walking our dog or doing dishes when I was in the hospital or bringing flowers and blankets, but they spent time praying over me. And there's a Bible verse, is one of my favorites. It's James 5:16. It says, "The effectual, fervent prayers of the righteous are powerful and effective." And I am a firm believer that prayer made the difference and led to my breakthrough. And I'm just so grateful today to be alive because of it.
Yeah, and something that stuck out to me while you were saying your story a little bit on that pre-breakthrough aspect is just the part that really just throws a lot of people off, and people don't really think about this rare disease, is when you go into the hospital. And I'm just thinking from experience dealing with cancer in the family, is you go
Hmm.
in there, you get in the hospital, and it's like, okay, here's your treatment plan. I know cancers, all of them don't have a cure, but here's your treatment plan. We're doing XYZ. We're going through all the motions. We're doing everything we can. But then when you go into the hospital for porphyria and you don't have that understanding, or your healthcare staff doesn't have the understanding,
Hmm.
there's no treatment plan. And
Yes.
so all bets are off and everything's in the air. And so you're sitting there with such uncertainty because the people that you're trying to have so much confidence in don't have
Yes.
confidence themselves. And I think
Yes.
I was kind of
Yes,
catching that from your pre-breakthrough situation, and then post-breakthrough, just the power of obviously prayer and the power of support. You
yes,
got a lot of support,
very much
and
so.
I also just wanted to kind of ask about, okay, so they say you're diagnosed with AIP, and once you're diagnosed with AIP, did things click after that? Was it a slow road to kind of get to getting treatment, or what did that path look like for you?
Yeah, so I like to say it shifted somewhat quickly, right? Because
Yeah.
I think to your point, people don't realize when you get the diagnosis and panhematin is the treatment, it's not like hospitals just have panhematin sitting on a shelf where it's readily available, readily accessible, because it is so expensive and this is such a rare disease. And
Mhm.
so it has to be imported from out of state. And typically it takes 24 to 48 hours. My husband told me it took 2 to 3 days. Right. And so it was kind of a weird period of waiting. It's on one hand, I was excited and relieved to have this answer, but I'm still waiting for this treatment to arrive. And so, mind you, I'm still in pain. I'm still dealing with this physical pain. And, I would receive Dilaudid. It would last maybe 20, 25 minutes before it would wear off. And
Yep.
then I'm waiting several hours, right, for another dosage. So I'm still rocking back and forth and I'm still writhing. I'm still fighting. So it's just very strange juxtaposition, if you will, of this excitement and this relief, but also this waiting and pain. It's a very weird spot to be in. But I will say when it arrived, game changer. I mean, that's really when it
Yeah.
started clicking. And I've often explained it to people, family members, friends who aren't familiar with AIP. I basically tell them when you've got AIP, your body can't effectively produce heme, right? And that's what we need for oxygen, for energy. And when it tries to produce it, I tell them it just can't do it all the way, right? And so toxins start to build up. It's almost like a factory, right? Where you have,
Mhm.
all this machinery trying to produce heme and it can't do it. And so toxins start to build up. And that's really what led to my symptoms and led to that pain. And so I tell people panhematin basically gives me that missing piece that my body doesn't have. And it basically tells my body, stop producing these toxins that's making her sick. Just stop it.
Yeah.
and I felt like
Right.
when the panhematin finally kicked in, oh my goodness, Andrew, game changer. And I felt like a new woman. I felt like I had a new lease on life. And I remember sitting there receiving this treatment. And for the first time in 2 months, I said, you know what? It's going to be okay. I say, Vonda, it's going to be okay. And best feeling in the world.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to that experience of Panhematin. And when you were saying that, I almost related to it in a sense of Panhematin was the oil for the squeaky wheel,
Yes.
and that's just kind of how
Yes.
I think of
I
it.
love that.
And I've had good and bad experiences with Panhematin, not because of Panhematin itself, but because
Mm-hmm.
of how it was administered and how it was dealt with. And I think
Mm,
a lot of people don't talk about the the details that lead up to administering something like that. So for me, I initially had a healthcare staff that didn't understand fully how to administer it, in which
mm,
they were doing it through a regular IV, and that led to blood clots and things
mm,
like that. In which it wasn't for years that we were able to find out, okay, you need a PICC line or you need a port. That's how you need to do
mm-hmm.
it. So we're not, it's a thick substance, it'll clog some lines. And I always make sure that I mention that to people. I obviously not medical advice, but I want to raise
Yeah,
awareness to, hey,
absolutely.
don't you, this could be something a little bit better that we should use to do this. But I wanted to ask, I know obviously panhematin has been a huge vital role in your treatment, your journey, but overall, what's the experience been like, and what was your thought just seeing that come into the room and everything like that?
So it's so funny, Andrew, when you mention oil, because I often call panhematin black gold because it was so
It's
precious,
so true.
right? And so I just
Mhm.
remember having this relief, right? And this joy when I saw it finally being administered. The black liquid. I mean, I was like, what is this black liquid that they're administering? But I was like, you know
Mhm.
what? I'm just so grateful for it because as soon as they started administering it, I just felt like, oh my gosh, I'm getting out of the woods. I can see this light at the end of the tunnel. And so they did it 5 days in a row, same time each day for an hour. And at first I thought it was kind of odd. But then I learned, it was by design, right? It's really giving my body time to understand you need to stop producing these toxins and to give my body that chance to reset and restabilize. And I just remember sitting there and just I had the greatest peace in the world, knowing I was finally getting the life-saving treatment that I needed. And when they released me to go home, oh my goodness, I felt like it was a whole new chapter that was unfolding. And, it was really important to me and to my husband that when I went home, I wasn't just jumping back right into my normal routine because it's so easy to short circuit our recovery by jumping back into things too quickly. And so we said, we're not going to go back to our
Mhm.
normal routine. We want to take some time just to heal and recover. And so our son was 4 years old at the time. And my parents, who live in South Carolina, they ended up taking him for 2 weeks just so we could have some time to
Mm.
heal. And we actually ended up getting a cabin at Hocking Hills, which is about an hour away from where we lived in the
Oh,
Columbus,
cool.
Ohio area. And we took our 6-year-old, or then
Yeah.
6-year-old golden retriever Tate with us. And so we just had our dog in our cabin, and it was so therapeutic just being out in nature. There's a picture I look at to this day that makes me balk a little bit because I'm standing next to our dog and I am so gaunt looking. I didn't realize how bad I looked, but I was so gaunt and so frail looking. And so I really used that time to recover just to gain my weight back. Drank a lot of milkshakes, you know, took in a lot of calories just to get myself healthy
Mhm.
again. But being out in nature, being able to unplug and just to heal, it was such a blessing, and not just for me, but for my husband as well. A lot of times people don't think about the caregivers, and so while I'm fighting through the pain and fighting for my life, he was also going through his own crisis, right? And just fighting for me, right? When I didn't have a voice and dealing with the mental and the emotional and the physical exhaustion and taking care of our son and running him to different friends' houses who were kind enough to take him in while he was at the hospital. And so he needed that time to heal too, just mentally and emotionally. So it was a time for us to heal. It was a time for us to reflect and to look to the future. And I recognize during that time of reflection, I need to do some things differently because I'll be honest, before I got sick, I was a workaholic and I ran on 2, 3 hours of sleep of not a night. I was working full time, demanding job. I would travel for work, being a wife, being a mom. I was working my doctorate, and I just did not take care of myself. And when I was diagnosed with AIP, I learned some of the triggers are alcohol, caffeine, which weren't major issues for me. Some of the pain medication, frankly, a lot of the pain medication they're giving me, trying to figure out what was going on, actually ended up poisoning me, right? Because they were triggers for porphyria unbeknownst to us. But some of the bigger triggers were fasting, it was stress, it was sleep
Mhm.
deprivation. And I realized, oh my goodness, I kind of caused some of this just through my lifestyle. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And so during that time of really healing and looking to the future, I said, what can I do differently to make sure I'm taking care of myself? Because I can't let this happen again.
Yeah, it's a lot, and what I was kind of getting stuck to when you were talking about is just the recovery period, the time that you allowed yourself to have, which most people
Hmm.
don't really give themselves or allow themselves to have that awareness to take that time. And I think
Hmm.
it's very important to spend that time to recover. But I wanted to ask, just obviously you got your doctorate, so
Hmm.
you had that attack, you recovered, you went through the doctorate, and I just wanted to ask, just how did this whole journey shape that, and what was your outlook on one, getting the doctorate, and just how you were going to kind of proceed in life, the journey of life with what you went through?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. That whole ordeal, that whole dark season, it reminded me life is short and
Mhm.
life is too short not to follow my passion. And I was already in the midst of my doctorate when I got sick. I didn't unenroll from school, but I really had to take a step back and I kind of did. I mean, honestly, just some of the bare minimum, some discussion posts here and there just to kind of maintain my standing.
Mhm.
But I had to pull back from all my research and writing. And it was really hard for me. And so after, I got through my sickness, I said, I'm going back in completely, taking the bull by the horns, because again, I realize life is short and I want to make sure I follow through on pursuing my dream. And my doctorate has really been a dream of mine for years. And really my inspiration was my dad. So he was career military, and he ended up pursuing his PhD in the early 2000s. He retired from the Army in 2005, and then he graduated with his PhD in 2007. And I remember
Mm.
sitting in the audience during his graduation and just smiling and thinking to myself, you know what? If he can do it, I can do it. And from that point on, I said, this is going to be a dream of mine. And so after I got through my sickness, I said, I can't let go of this dream. And so I pursued it and ended up finishing. I was very, very proud of myself, and, focused on employee engagement is my area of study for my dissertation. And that's something that's really near and dear to my heart, because so many of us spend more time at work, right, than we do at home with our own families. And what can we do to make
Mhm.
sure that people are in a workplace where they feel valued and appreciated and where it's rewarding? And that's why I really wanted to focus on that research. And so again, after my sickness, I said I want to make sure I'm following through on this research that is so important to me. So just from an educational standpoint, I had a new lease on life. But even from a career standpoint, after I thought about how life is so short, not to follow your passion, I said, what can I do in my career that really allows me to um, do something that really tugs on the heartstrings, right? And allows me to make a difference in the lives of others, and make this world a better place. And so a lot of the roles I took on from that point on were really geared around that. I had a role at a former company where I focused on environmental and social justice, and making sure that as a company, as we were making decisions, what can we do to make sure we're taking feedback from our communities into consideration, especially if they're
Mm.
low wealth or communities of color or other historically disadvantaged communities. And so that was one of my favorite roles I've ever had, because I had a chance to really be a voice for those who didn't always have a voice. And even now, the work I do is focused on culture and engagement, and making sure that associates feel listened to and valued and appreciated and supported. So
Yeah.
I'm just a lot more intentional throughout, my career now, and doing work that again helps to enhance quality of life for others, because in the few short years that God has blessed me to be on this earth, and with the second chance at life that I have, what am I doing to help enhance quality of life for others and to make a difference? And so that really has become kind of my North Star and my compass for my career and my life going forward.
And outside of intentionality, I mean, what has helped you kind of post sickness to kind of achieve that work life balance, or what is some actionable steps you would say for people that you did to achieve something closer to that? Because I know it's hard to achieve.
Yeah, yeah, it is so, so hard to achieve. And I was just telling somebody this yesterday. I said, when you're on your deathbed, you're never going to say, I wish I spent more time working on that PowerPoint presentation, right? Or
Sure.
I wish I spent more time working on that email. You're going to say, I wish I spent more time with my family. I wish I spent more time living out my faith. I wish I spent more time getting outside and taking a walk and stopping and smelling the roses. And so that was my experience. And so getting on the other side of this sickness, that really catapulted my passion for work life balance. And like you said, it's hard to get it just right. But
Mhm.
I wanted to be a lot more intentional about it. And again, I used to be a workaholic. And after my near death experience, I said, no more. I said, I can't do this. This is not sustainable. Work is important and it's great to have work, but you can't let work have you. Right. And I said, there's so much more to life than work. And I want to be present for the people I love. And that really starts with being present for myself. Right. And
Mm.
being intentional about self-care. And for me, that was hard. I mean, that was a hard mindset to shift.
Yeah.
It for me, it started with getting rid of the myths, right? And so I think one of the big lies I used to believe was that self-care is an indulgence, it's a luxury. And I realized it's not
Mm.
a luxury, right? It's a necessity if we want a high quality of life. I used to think, self-care was selfish, and now I realize self-care is actually one of the most selfless things you can do, because to put myself in a position where I can take care of other people, I have to take care of myself first. We always hear that you have to put on the oxygen mask, on the flight yourself first, right? Before you
Mhm.
can administer it to somebody else. And you can't pour from an empty
Mhm.
cup. right? And so I said I need to make sure that I'm prioritizing that, and it's not a one-time experience. It's not just a matter of going to the spa once and getting a massage and calling it done, right? It has to be a habitual,
Yeah.
ongoing thing, right? That I prioritize, and it doesn't have to be time consuming. Even just getting away from the computer and taking a walk around the neighborhood on a nice day and just being able to focus on just my mental health. Those little things can make a difference. And I will say the biggest thing that's happened since my sickness is sleep. Oh my goodness. I think I told you I used to run a 2, 3 hours of sleep a night. Now,
Mhm.
do not mess with my sleep. I protect my sleep, something fierce. And
Mm.
I am a huge proponent of getting, right, those 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep a night, that we really are supposed to be getting anyway. And just even like you said, just, another big tip is nourishing my body, right? Making sure that being careful about what I ingest, cutting back on even like red meat. I love red meat, but cutting back on that and trying to choose some healthier options, drinking more water, setting boundaries. I used to
Mhm.
say yes to everything. And so one of the things my husband always asks before you say yes to this, is this going to add stress to your life or is this going to energize you? Right.
Mm.
I don't have to do everything because if I'm saying yes to something, I'm saying no to something else. And am I saying no to my family or my health or my friends or other things that are important to me? So I think just being a lot more thoughtful. I mean, just even getting out and going on a hike. I love being out in nature. Connecting with friends, doing morning devotions. I wasn't always, consistent with it. And now in the morning, I love getting up and spending time with the Lord and reading scripture and having time of worship. And that really sets the tone for my day and really has enhanced my mental health over the years before I jump into the hustle and bustle, of my day-to-day life. And I think honestly, the biggest thing I will say is self-compassion, right?
Mm.
Extending myself grace. I often say we're all juggling balls, right? And we're all juggling glass balls and rubber balls. And the glass balls are the things that are fragile. These are the things we can't allow to drop. And that's our family, it's our faith, it's our health, it's our well-being. Frankly, everything else is a rubber ball. And I used to get stressed out, so stressed out about these rubber balls in my life. And after my illness, I'm like, you know what? Someone cuts me off in traffic, rubber ball. I remember taking my son to school years ago, and it was St. Patty's Day and everyone was in green and he wasn't. I completely forgot about it. And old Vonda would have been stressed out and beating herself up over it. And now I'm like, rubber ball, right? So I think all of that
Mm.
has really contributed to my self-care. And I'm just grateful. I feel like I'm just a lot healthier, a lot more lucid, a lot more energized because I'm taking the time to prioritize that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people out there that just think it's selfish to put yourself first, and I
Hmm.
would argue it. And you've already cleared that path and just said, hey, no, this is not how it works. And there's so many people that think, oh, I could be working instead of going outside for a walk, or I could be
Yes,
doing this. This is minutes I could have been spending on my business. And it's just like if you don't find that balance, there's something at the end of that road that's a lot worse than those couple minutes you just missed out on your business. So, and
exactly.
that's burnout. That's
Exactly.
really hardcore burnout. And,
Hmm.
but
Yes.
I really like your advice about the whole taking a second in every situation to create that awareness, because I think when people try to learn more about situational awareness or any type of awareness, really, you're trying to pretty much stop and come up with this A to Z or 12-step plan to create awareness. But in reality, you taking a step and determining this is a rubber ball versus a glass one or
Yes.
glass rubber, it's a second thing, and it's like, okay, that doesn't matter because you've associated that with a rubber ball, that it doesn't really
Yes.
matter that much, whereas the glass ball, it matters a lot. So I really like that
Yes.
advice. It's really good.
Yeah. Thank you.
But I wanted to ask you too, just because obviously you've had to create this or try to create this work-life balance with work and then the post sickness. I wanted to ask just how it's kind of affected the family dynamic, because we're obviously when you throw a wrench in as a rare disorder, you really don't know what's going to happen. And obviously, you mentioned, I mean, you were on your deathbed, and it's just like
Hmm.
that messes things up a lot in a family dynamic. And I wanted to ask you just how has that impacted yours specifically?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that question. I feel like it's taught me to be present. Um, I often tell people we're not human doings, we're human beings. And so we need to get
Mhm.
better at being, right? And just being present. And so that's one thing I've really tried to do more of with my family. So I think about my son. He was 4 years old when I was going through this whole sickness. And at one point, he told me, he's like, Mom, I'm sick of you going to the doctor's house. And I just want you to be home with me and play with me and do puzzles with me. And that was so heartrending, right? Because he was 4. He didn't understand I was fighting for my life. He just wanted his mom. He wanted me to be present. And so to this day, I just really value that quality time with him. He's 13 right now, which is crazy to think about. But the other day we were in the
Yeah.
basement watching a movie together, just me and him enjoying a mother-son date, and he was kind of reminiscing on a couple of other times that we've done that. And so he treasures that, and I treasure that more than I ever did before after coming on the other side of my illness. And I think the same thing with my husband. I remember when I was sick and I was in the hospital. It was a Sunday, and he said, I think I'm gonna just stay here with you. He's like, I might as well not go to church today. And I said, "Look, why don't you go to church? Like, I'm here. I'll still be here. I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. So why don't you just
Yeah.
go to church?" And he tells me the story, and it's always left an impression on me. But when he went to church, they started singing a worship song called "Good Good Father," and he was sitting down, and he said, "You know what? I don't want to sing right now because I don't feel like you're being a good good father. My wife is on her deathbed." And it's almost like God was nudging him, just stand up, just stand up. And so he stood up. He's like, "Okay, but I'm not going to sing." And then it's like God was nudging him again, just sing. And so he said he started singing, and it was the most beautiful moment of worship for him because there was nothing like praising in pain. And one of the things he was telling God in that moment was like, "You know what, God, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm trusting you, but I'm grateful that no matter what happens to Vonda, just for the years that we've had together." And he just developed this heart of gratitude, right? This pain turned into gratitude. And when he was telling me that, all of a sudden I started thinking more about not just this horrible situation and predicament I was in, but being grateful for the years that we've had, right? And I think we just had this newfound gratitude for each other. And that's something that's carried on now that I am recovered and healed. I'm just grateful, for his presence in my life and really prioritizing that quality time with him. So it's just taught me to be present. And one other thing that kind of popped up that I didn't share earlier, but I think is such an important part to this whole, whole story, this whole journey I was on,
Yeah.
was after I left the hospital and I was on the road to recovery. Before I got sick, we were hoping to at least have one more child. And after my sickness, I wasn't even thinking about it. Like, it just wasn't my priority. I was just grateful to be alive. I was focused on drinking
Mm.
milkshakes and trying to gain my weight back. And,
Yeah.
and then we found out, a couple months later, we were expecting our daughter. But the cool thing was the very first day that I got sick, the very first day I had that abdominal pain was April 8th, 2017. And would you believe me when I told you the doctor said her due date was April 8th, 2018? And
Oh, that's
so,
crazy.
so for me, it just gave me goosebumps. And the moment I put two and two together and connected those dots, I was like, wow, this truly is a miracle. And I don't believe in coincidences. I felt like, I mean, it truly was God's hand in it. He truly was the owner of time. And I was just really, really grateful, and I call her a miracle baby because of that. And so even now, she's my little miracle, and she's 8 now. And we always have, great mother daughter time. And so I just really prioritize that with her. So just from that perspective of family dynamic, I feel like being present with each of them and just soaking up precious moments, it means more to me than ever before because tomorrow's not promised to any of us. And I learned that the hard way. Right. And I'm just really
Yeah.
grateful when I can be present with them. And it's something I really, really prioritize and take seriously.
Yeah, and it's just the presence, the awareness too. I wanted to ask you too. Just I know we've touched on a little bit is just the
Yeah.
caretaking aspect of your husband,
Hmm.
and just because he's obviously it probably wasn't on his bingo card to have this happen to you,
No, not at
so
all.
it can be a little bit of a slap in the face, and then just like how do I best handle this? I
Yes.
wasn't expecting this, And although being there every step of the way, sometimes there's the struggle of what can I do versus what should I do. I don't know. Maybe it's all
Hmm.
up in the air, but what would you say has been kind of your experience with the caretaking aspect? And what would you suggest to maybe couples or families out there who are trying to tighten up and make that dynamic the best possible while they're going through something?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think being aligned is so, so important. Um, when I was communicating my pain and I was sharing all that I was going through, um, he did have some moments where he's like, okay, this is legit, right? Because we want it right, because you get to the point where it's like, okay, all these tests are coming back negative, right? And so I think we had to have some heart to hearts, and I emphasize, I promise you I'm not making this up. But I think having that unified front was really, really important. And I had to trust him. I mean, I think honestly, when you go through something like this, you just have to trust each other, because there are so many moments I just didn't have a voice. I was trying to make it through the next day, the next hour, the next second, the next millisecond. And I
Mhm,
was so feeble and I had no energy. He was my voice, right? When I didn't have it. And so he had to advocate for me. And that's one thing I would really encourage anyone who's finding themselves in this caretaking role. You have to advocate. I've learned going through, and I'm sure you experienced this too, going through the whole journey, this medical journey. You have to be your own advocate, right? And no one's going to fight for you the way you will. And so I'm just so grateful for him, just from that caretaking perspective, really being able to fight for me and pound down the door, metaphorically, to get me the
mhm,
care that I needed, because it's so easy for people to write you off and just say you're just there for the pain medication. You're making it up. It's all in your head. And so I'm just grateful that he was willing to go to bat for me, and that's really a big part of the caretaking role. It's not just meeting the physical needs, right? But it's in the emotional and the mental needs, but really being that advocate. That's one of the biggest things that I'm so grateful for, as I look back over that journey that he took to heart, and he was going to stop at nothing to make sure, I got the care and the support that I needed. And had he not done that, I don't know that I would be here today, honestly.
yeah, and it's I feel like it's often overlooked too, because you think about people in their hospital beds, and the family's not there, or the friends or whatever
Hmm.
aren't there to advocate, and
Yes.
you know for certain that the care is nowhere near what it could be with another set of eyes
Hmm.
sitting in the chair next to the bed. And
Yes.
I think you've hit it home. I want to smash it home because it's so important to just pull somebody in, have a support system to sit there and yell when you can't yell and push when you can't push. And it's very important, because
Yes.
although we want to say that the healthcare staff has the best interest in mind, sometimes, I mean, it could be going against the safe drug list, and although their intention is to be
Yes.
better,
Yes.
that could make things worse. So
Very much
it's
so.
very important, very important.
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, he often emphasized that safe drug list when I was, going through my recovery, just to make sure it's front and center and top of mind. He even got me a medical bracelet, where if I ever have an attack, people will know, hey, this is AIP and this is what you need to do. So I'm just really, really grateful that he really hammered a lot of that stuff home, and you're completely spot on. Having the extra pair of eyes makes all the difference.
Hmm. And I wanted to ask too, just how has the American Porphyria Foundation, how has that played a role in all this for you?
Yeah, so I'm just so grateful. I often tell people you can't get through these kinds of things in isolation, right? There is power in community. And ever since I came to know the APF and um really got connected, it has been life-changing for me to know I'm not alone, because sometimes you feel like you're alone. You're on an
Mhm,
island by yourself, and talking to so many people, and hearing their stories and hearing their journeys and their miracles and their struggles and their challenges. I have a community that makes me feel like, okay, you know what? I'm never going to be alone. And even just sharing tips and tricks and research, all of that has been incredibly helpful. And I know my husband really used a lot of that research when we just learned about my diagnosis. He was able to take a lot of that information to the doctors, right? Because it was so rare, and it's amazing how little people know about this. So the APF, it truly has been like my extended family. And it's the family I never knew I would become part of, but I'm just really, really grateful to have such a caring community of people who, again, makes me feel like I'm not alone, and we're all in this together, and people who can relate to my journey and my struggle. There's just a lot of peace and comfort and solace in that.
Yeah, and just to put the analogy back into perspective is just being on an island by yourself, and just the
Mhm.
importance of community and being able to obviously lean on others and get the help and the advice from everybody is just so important. But I wanted to ask you, just if you had to give advice, just if somebody was your 2017 self right now,
Mhm.
what would you tell them as a piece of advice?
Oh gosh. Gosh, that's such a great question. I would say, you know, I'm really grateful for what I went through because I think before I got sick, I didn't always understand people who went through pain, right? Or went through chronic pain. And it's just hard when you haven't walked in those shoes. And ever since that experience, I've developed such an empathy, right, for people. And so you talk about people who are going through what I went through in 2017. I just want to say I see you. Um, I understand what you're going through. And for me, it moves me when I think about people who are going through pain because I've been there. And so I
Yeah.
would just encourage people who are experiencing that, and they're trying to figure out answers. Keep fighting. Don't give up. There's so many times, so many times that I just was tempted to throw in the towel. But I said, you know what? This is not the end of my story. And I knew deep down in my core, my journey wasn't over. So I would just say, keep fighting. And kind of going back to what I said before, make sure you have a community of people around you who can help fight for you because you cannot fight this alone.
Mhm.
So I would just say, keep fighting. And for me, just personally, there is a lot of power in prayer. Again, my faith is incredibly important to me. And I often tell people when you're going through hard times in life, God's sovereignty was the pillow on which I could lay my head. And so there is such a peace that came from, even in the midst of this dark season, in the midst of this fire, I felt this sense of peace knowing I could lean on him. So I would say just really trust in that. And again, just keep fighting. Don't give up. Your story is not over yet.
That's an amazing piece of advice for people. I also wanted to ask before we wrapped up here if there was anything that maybe we didn't touch on that you wanted to bring up and let people know.
Yeah. I would say, AIP was a bump in the road, but it wasn't the end of my journey. And I feel like, again, I'm a person of faith. I feel like God spared my life for a purpose. And just like we talked about professionally, I feel like I'm grateful to be here to have the second chance to continue to do the work that's important to me, to be present with my family. But one of the other big things that's really important to me is just ministry. So very heavily involved in ministry with my church. And I spend a lot of time just telling people my story, and um, Jesus is my best friend, and really telling people the good news that I've experienced in my life, and I often tell people really the good news for me is that God is perfect, and to be forever with Him in heaven, also have to be perfect, but I'm not. And my husband, my kids will tell people I am absolutely far from perfect, and I fall short. Um, and because of that, I deserve to die, but God loved me so much that he sent his son Jesus to live that perfect life that I couldn't live and to die on the cross and take that death that I deserved. And so when I admit I'm not perfect and that he died on the cross for my sins and confess him as my Lord and the one who leads my life, I get to be with him forever in heaven. And for me, that's great news, and it doesn't just apply to me but applies to every single person. And I see it as simple as just ABC, right? It's accepting the fact that you're not perfect and believing that Jesus died for you, and choosing to follow him as Lord, and you'll be with him forever. And for me, it's the best decision I ever made. And
Yeah.
I love telling people that story, and I'm just grateful that God spared me, just if nothing else, to be able to share that, in my day-to-day life. And I'm just grateful that he's given me that opportunity while I still have breath in my lungs to share that. So I just wanted to emphasize that I'm
Mhm.
just God still has me here for a purpose. And in 2017, when again, that season was looking very, very dire. And I felt like this was going to be the end. And again, I was praying to die in various moments. I'm so grateful that he saw a different ending. And I'm living that now. And I'm
Yeah.
just so, so grateful to be alive. I truly feel like I'm a walking, living, breathing miracle. And I'm just really, really encouraged to see what the future holds. And it's also a reminder sometimes the darkest seasons of our life can also be the most beautiful, right? And those two
Mm,
things can coexist. And as I
yeah.
look back, I'm grateful for every bit of pain I experienced because it made me who I am today. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. If someone were to say, "Hey, would you want to go back and redo 2017 without it?" Absolutely not, because it's such an important part of my journey and my story, and it's changed me forever.
It's so so well put, and it's one of those things, and I can relate heavily to that, being diagnosed and looking back and honestly not erasing it, because it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I feel more grounded as a human being now, and you just the simple things of my feet is on the ground. I mean, you're stepping
Yes,
in dirt, you're stepping on the grass. This is real life. This is now. This is right here. This is presence. And I think there's
yes.
just such a power to that. So I appreciate you taking the time to share that. But I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and chat. I know we had some busy schedules and some conflict trying to throw this together,
Yes.
but I'm glad we were able to put it together finally. And I appreciate you taking us through the story from A to Z, the Wheel of Fortune story, and I definitely wish you nothing but success with your with business, the doctorate, and that how that progresses. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It truly has been a pleasure. Thank you for the chance to share my story, and thank you for sharing your story as well. It's again, it's
Yeah.
always good to know that we're not alone. So that means the world.
Yes, yes, very much so. Well, I appreciate it, Vonda. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to our podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with friends, family, or anyone who could benefit. And please don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on your preferred platform. It helps us spread awareness, and we would be extremely grateful. You can also follow Rarely Discussed on Instagram, YouTube, as well as TikTok. If you're someone seeking diagnosis for porphyria, visit porphyriafoundation.org to receive a free doctor packet, forms for free DNA testing, and a list of doctors in your area. Stay tuned for more episodes of Rarely Discussed.